The air in Blackwood Asylum always smelled of boiled linen and dread, a sterile perfume that failed to mask the scent of human despair. But on the morning of October 11th, 1924, another smell joined the mixture: ozone, the sharp tang of lightning on a cloudless day. It came from the throat of Jacob Fenn, a patient in Ward C, a man whose silence had been, until that moment, absolute. He screamed a single name, Eleonora, just as the young nurse tripped on the freshly mopped floor, her head striking the cast-iron radiator with sound like a dropped melon. By the time the orderlies reached her, she was gone. Jacob Fenn, meanwhile, was quiet again, staring at the wall, his eyes seeing something that was no longer there. He had not seen her fall. His room faced the opposite direction. He had only seen her end, a final, flickering image in the haunted theater of his mind. This was not the first time, and it would not be the last. His curse was not madness, but clarity, a perfect, terrible window into the last breath of every soul around him. This is the story of a man whose mind became attuned for the final moments of others, a chronicle of a life spent witnessing the end. If you believe that history's most profound lessons are found in its most unsettling events, subscribe and follow us into the shadows of the past, where the most human stories are waiting to be told. Before he was a phenomenon, Jacob Fenn was just another piece of human luggage dropped at the gates of Blackwood Asylum. He arrived on a rain-slick Tuesday in the autumn of 1922, his face as blank as the intake forms that catalog his existence. The admitting physician, a man whose patience had long since been eroded by the tide of misery that washed up at his desk, scribbled a diagnosis of catatonic schizophrenia. It was a convenient label, a neat box for a man who refused to speak, who barely seemed to breathe, whose eyes looked not at you, but through you. For 2 years, Jacob was a ghost in the machine. He was fed, washed, and led from the cell to the barren day room, his silence mistaken for a symptom of a fractured mind. The other patients, in their clamor and their chaos, provided a soundtrack to his quietude. The staff saw him as an easy case, a body that required little more than routine maintenance. But they failed to see the truth. His silence wasn't empty. It was full. It was a dam holding back an ocean of last words, a fortress built to withstand a constant siege of final, ragged breaths. The dam finally broke on a cold Thursday night, under the watch of an orderly named Arthur Gable, a man whose imagination was as starch and rigid as his uniform. For him, the night shift was a predictable rhythm of echoing footsteps, the clink of keys, and the low, collective murmur of troubled sleep. But on this night, the rhythm shattered. From Jacob Fenn's cell, a sound hoarse and dry, like stones grinding together, spilled into the corridor. Arthur approached, his irritation rising. "Be still in there, Fenn," he grunted, rapping his knuckles on the steel door. The whisper continued, desperate and sharp, the wire behind the eyelids pulling too tight. Jacob's voice was a thread of sound, but it carried an unnerving clarity. "It's going to snap. Old man Hemlock, he feels it snapping." Arthur scoffed. Elias Hemlock was a quiet drunkard in cell C-12, sleeping off his latest detox. Then, from 2 doors down came a sudden wet thud. It was the sound of dead weight hitting a linoleum floor. When the on-call physician pronounced Hemlock dead of a massive cerebral aneurysm, Arthur Gable stood frozen in the hallway. The doctor's words. A vessel snapped just behind the eye, playing a terrifying loop in his mind. The whisper from the silent man had not been a mad raving. It was an echo of a final, terrible moment. Dr. Alistair Finch believed in the observable, the measurable, the provable. He viewed the human mind as a complex but ultimately decipherable machine, and madness as a mechanical failure. The ramblings of his patients were symptoms to be catalogued, not prophecies to be heeded. Yet, the story of Elias Hemlock passed between hushed orderlies like a forbidden ghost story, lodged itself in his scientific mind like a splinter of glass. It defied logic. It defied reason. And so, Finch began his own private study, a leather-bound ledger kept under lock and key, its purpose known to no one else. He started by documenting Jacob's every mutter, every tremor, every vacant stare, cross-referencing them with the asylum's daily incident reports. November 2nd, 1924, one entry reads, "Patient J." Fenn became agitated at 11:47 a.m., repeating the phrase, "A soap, it burns the throat." At 11:51 a.m., patient Agnes Reed in the laundry ingested lye soap in a suicide attempt. Subject Fenn could not have witnessed the act. Each entry was a cold, hard stone laid upon the grave of Finch's skepticism. This wasn't madness. This was something else. A terrible, perfect, and inexplicable form of sight. Finch's scientific curiosity quickly metastasized into a kind of morbid obsession. He began to conduct discrete experiments, tests that pushed the boundaries of medical ethics into a gray, shadow-filled territory. He had Jacob moved to a room adjacent to the terminally ill ward, a place where death was a constant, wheezing presence. The results were immediate and devastating. Jacob's occasional whispers became a near constant, overlapping murmur, a horrifying chorus of final moments. "The water is so cold," he would breathe, and hours later, a man with failing kidneys would pass in the night. "Can't catch my breath," he'd rasp, and a woman in the final stages of consumption would draw her last. Finch's ledger, once a bastion of scientific objectivity, became the journal of a man losing his faith in reason. His handwriting grew frantic. The ink bled with desperation. "His perception is not limited by walls," he scrawled one night, the lamp oil burning low. "It is as if he is a radio receiver, and the frequency is the precise moment of cessation. I am no longer studying a patient. I am staring into the abyss, and it is showing me its work." Chapter 3, A Curse of Whispers. To the world, Jacob Fenn was a man locked in a silent prison. But inside there was no silence. There was only a cacophony of endings. His curse was not a vision that played out on the back of his eyelids. It was a total, visceral hijacking of his own senses. He would be sitting on the edge of his cot, staring at the peeling paint on the wall, when suddenly the sterile air of his room would be replaced by the icy shock of river water. His lungs, dry and still just a moment before, would begin to burn, convulsing the phantom agony of a drowning fisherman miles away. The rough wool of his asylum-issued blanket would transform into the splintered wood of a collapsing scaffold, the imagined pain of a snapped spine radiating through his own healthy back. It was a relentless assault. He was a passenger in 1,000 different bodies at the exact moment of their destruction, feeling the pressure of the hangman's rope, the sudden, blinding heat of an industrial fire, the slow, cold creep of poison through veins that were not his own. His mind was a tomb, not for memories, but for the fresh, raw terror of strangers' final seconds. He tried to build a fortress out of his own senses, a desperate defense against the incoming tide. He would hum, a low, monotonous drone that made his teeth vibrate, hoping to drown out the whispers. He would press the heels of his palms into his eye sockets until bursts of color exploded behind them, trying to overwrite the images that flickered in his mind's eye. But it was useless. The whispers were not sound waves. They were ghosts that bypassed his ears and materialized directly in his consciousness. The sudden, coppery taste of blood would fill his mouth as a butcher a mile away slipped with his cleaver. The phantom smell of burnt sugar and almonds would waft through his sterile room, the last sensation of a baker trapped in a kitchen fire. Every human face became a potential memento mori. He could not look the kind, round-faced nurse in the eye without the risk of seeing the light drain from it. Every connection was a countdown he could not stop, a tragedy he was forced to preview. He was the world's most crowded loner, a man sharing the most intimate moment of life with countless strangers, yet utterly, terrifyingly alone. Secrets, like infections, cannot be contained in a place as porous as an asylum. It began with a disgruntled orderly, a man named Gable who was dismissed for drinking on duty and left with a grievance festering in his heart. He carried the story of the Blackwood Seer out of the asylum's sterile halls and into the smoky, ink-stained office of a city journalist. The headline that followed was an explosion of ink and speculation, and the world outside the asylum walls finally learned of the quiet man in Ward C. The reaction was not one of fear, but a strange, desperate pilgrimage. They came in droves, mothers with pictures of sons lost in the war, wives of men with terminal diagnoses, their faces etched with a grief so profound they were willing to believe in anything. They were joined by spiritualists in long coats, their eyes wide with manic faith, and men in sharp suits whose quiet, watchful presence suggested more official governmental interest. The iron gates of Blackwood, once meant to keep the mad in, were now strained with the pressure of a world that had gone mad for a miracle or perhaps just for a glimpse of the abyss. Dr. Finch, once a detached observer, found himself transformed into a gatekeeper, a fierce protector of his singular, terrible specimen. He had Jacob moved to an isolated wing, the windows boarded up, the door fitted with a new lock. But the world could not be so easily silenced. The cries of the desperate bled through the brickwork. The flashbulbs of reporters popped like small, startling novas in the night, and the weight of 1,000 desperate prayers pressed down on the asylum's slate roof. For Jacob, the change was an escalation of his private hell. He was no longer dissipation. He was an object, a relic, a living oracle to be consulted. Each new face that managed to get a glimpse of him through a barred window was another potential death he would have to witness. The crowd outside wasn't a gathering of people. It was a library of pending tragedies, and their hopeful shouts were a chorus of future ghosts. Finch fought to shield him, not out of kindness, but to preserve the purity of the phenomenon. But he was trying to cage the wind. The world, in its frantic desire to understand death, was suffocating the only man who was forced to live with it every single day. Like a candle flame in a sudden draft, the official record of Jacob Fenn simply goes out. Dr. Finch's meticulous ledger ends abruptly mid-sentence on a page dated May 17, 1927. The asylum's own records of that year are sealed, marked by a single unhelpful stamp. Transfer by federal mandate. Where he was transferred to or why remains a void in the historical account. From this void, myths bloom like graveyard flowers. Some whisper that men in dark cars came for him in the dead of night, spiriting him away to a subterranean facility where his terrible gift could be studied, perhaps even weaponized, for the grim machinations of a nation that feared its enemies. Others, clinging to a more merciful narrative, believed his curse simply faded, the whispers ceasing one by one until he was left in a silence so complete, so absolute, that it was a mercy in itself. Perhaps he lived out his days as just another anonymous man, haunted not by death, but by the memory of it. But these are just stories, told to fill a space that history chose to leave empty. But the most chilling question is not where he went, but how he left. Did the curse hold true to the very end? In his final moments, was Jacob Fenn a spectator to his own demise? Did he feel the slow, methodical shutdown of his own heart, not as a participant, but as a detached, terrified observer? Did he taste the final, metallic tinge of his own blood as it stilled in his veins? It is a truly horrifying thought. A man forced to watch the light fade from his own eyes, to hear the final, ragged breath leave his own lungs, to experience the ultimate departure as just another premonition. Was he both the audience and the actor in his own final scene? The world may never know what became of him, but the legend of his life serves as a stark, unsettling meditation on the one truth that connects us all. His life was a brutal testament to the absolute certainty of death for everyone else, yet his own end remains the most profound mystery of all, a final, silent whisper meant only for him.